Hello, and welcome to Getting It.
The conversation where we try to understand life just that little bit more.
My name's Dan.
And my name is Saban.
We're both medical students based in London.
And in this episode, we discuss learning languages. We cover how to get started, how to learn a language efficiently, and the way language is used across the world.
Good afternoon.
It's pretty much the evening at this point. So.
Good evening.
Good evening, Dan. How you doing?
I'm very well, thanks. I guess it depends. When does evening start for you?
Oh, that's a good question. Is there like a legit time for it? But
No,
for me,
I
it
think
starts
it's a
from
transition
6.
zone. I think there's like a transition zone. So I think it's socially acceptable to say good evening probably between, well, for me, I'd say anything from 5:30 onwards, maybe 5:30 to 9 o'clock, maybe 10 o'clock. If I was like good evening, then I don't know, actually. I'm thinking about it now. 10 o'clock feels a bit late. Maybe 8 o'clock.
For me, 6 p.m. is hard line. It's evening now.
Okay. Even in the summer?
Yes.
Okay.
Yes.
Fair enough.
It's just all year round.
I mean, morning's a lot easier because morning is... there's actually a minute when it stops being good morning. And then afternoon is pretty chill. Yeah. Anytime up to like 5, 6-ish. And then slowly... people transition into saying good evening and then good night. Although I still say good evening until very late. Anyway, good evening, good afternoon, good morning. Depends, yeah. How are you doing today, Saban?
I am pretty tired, actually. So I went to the gym this morning, not this morning, this afternoon. I went this afternoon. And then I had to walk back because I didn't have access to my car. So there's a lot of uphill on the way back and I'm not used to that kind of cardio.
How far, where's the gym? Is it far from yours or?
No, it's in town. So how far is that from mine?
Half an hour?
It's about a half an hour walk, probably about just over a mile or something. But it hits different because of the uphills there. So,
yeah, okay, fair enough.
Yeah,
Did you do leg day or?
I'm more tired than usual. No, I didn't, thankfully. I did intend on doing so, but I was like, nah. So actually, dodging leg day for once was actually useful.
So now that we've got the pleasantries sorted, onto the topic of today's podcast, we're going to be talking about learning languages. Is that okay with you, boss man?
That is good. Calming.
Okay, wonderful. So hopefully over the next 45 minutes, roughly, we can just give an overview of our opinion, or I'll definitely be speaking in my opinion, on the best way to start learning a language and the process of improving in a language, what that means, and the end goals of it as well. Is that okay with you?
Yeah, sounds good. Sorry, I was just having a big gulp of water. I guess for some beginning context, I am terrible with languages, so I'm coming from a very novice standpoint. So I'm probably not going to be doing much talking, but just giving a noob's viewpoint. Although I have well, at least when I was younger, during normal secondary school kind of thing, I hated languages. I just hated learning it. Didn't see the point, didn't enjoy it. As in, I understood the point, but I just didn't enjoy it. And I wasn't very good at it. That's probably why I didn't enjoy it. But over the past, say, 2 years, just as I've kind of expanded my horizons, I've just naturally become more interested in history, which again was a big sticking point when I was younger, but now also languages. Although I still suck at them, and obviously I'm running out of neuroplasticity. So if I do want to learn languages, I've got to hurry up. But for me, Arabic is the main thing that kind of got me going. I was like, wow, I kind of want to learn a language. However, I kind of said to myself, and you remember this, Dan, that over the summer I'm going to start learning Arabic and make significant progress over the summer. I don't think I even sat down for one day to actually do anything related to Arabic. So I guess this would be a good topic for me to kind of learn a lot from, to basically be a therapy session basically for me and actually get my head into learning a language.
I think, first of all, I don't think you should sell yourself short. I don't think you're bad at languages. I mean, you have a good understanding of Urdu, you can understand that, right? And then from that, you've got a window into Hindi. And is Punjabi similar as well?
It's pretty much, no. Okay, so Hindi and Urdu are basically the same, at least from my understanding. And the only difference is the script. It's like in India, they use Sanskrit or whatever, and then the Arabic kind of alphabet in Pakistan. But otherwise, the actual spoken language is the same. with Punjabi, it is actually different slightly. I find it very hard to kind of figure out the difference between the two because my parents speak both at home, just or like, they intermingle it. So certain phrases are just kind of, I don't know if that's actually strict Urdu or Punjabi at that point. So that's the kind of way I see it. So I can speak it to a very basic level. I can understand all of it fine, but
it's a spectrum.
I should probably.
It's a spectrum.
Yeah.
That's what I love about languages. They're so often spectrums. We draw a border, we draw an international border, and then, but it's not. It's often not as simple as just they're speaking one language on one side of the border, and to the other side it's a different language. Languages are very it is a spectrum. So they follow geography, at least in the places where that language has been there for many hundreds of years. Europe's a good example of that. It's not just a case of you're in the center of Spain and you're speaking Castilian Spanish, and then you get to the border and then suddenly you're speaking Portuguese. The dialects become closer to Portuguese the closer you get to Spain. I mean, in the northwest of Spain where they speak Galician, that's very similar to Portuguese, and it's kind of a mix of Portuguese and Spanish. And then, if you go to the northeast of Spain and Catalonia, you get a lot more similarities with French. And then, the international border is a massive reason for the spectrum not being completely even as you go across the country. But still, it follows a spectrum, and that's what I really like about languages. So, we'll go into that in a minute, maybe, talking about what languages are related or what language to choose based off of how different languages are related. But, a background on my experience with languages. I would not want to say that I'm fluent in anything other than English, for sure, because I think to become fluent in a language, you need to have spent so much time immersed in that culture, either growing up there, knowing someone very well from that country, or someone who speaks that language. And it takes many, many years. I think to be fluent in a language, you need to be able to express yourself in that language without any problems ever. And you feel like you can perfectly express exactly what you mean, exactly how you feel in that language. You just have a complete control over it. And you don't have to think about it ever. You never encounter really any problems with it. And I could only say that I have that with English, but there are some languages where I feel fairly comfortable speaking it or listening to it and being in that environment. And for those, it would probably be Spanish and Portuguese. And then I feel fairly comfortable speaking French as well, and a bit of Italian. And then over the last few months, I've been learning Mandarin very intensely. So now I feel comfortable having conversations in Mandarin up to a point, but definitely not able to discuss, anything too complex. And I speak in very like broken Chinese if I'm speaking it with someone. So it sounds it's laden with errors. So I don't want to. I think online you get a lot of people who claim to speak a certain number of languages, but I struggle to believe that someone can speak more than 4 languages fluently, and even being able to call yourself bilingual is an incredible achievement. Something that I didn't really give enough credit to when I was younger. The amount of people who are fluent in English have come to the UK or come to the US from a different country, growing up with a different language, coming here and then being fluent in English is incredible. So every day my respect for those people is growing. Even my mum, she's fluent. She was brought up speaking Portuguese. She was born in Mozambique where they speak Portuguese, and then in Portugal after where they speak Portuguese, obviously. And then now I would say she's fluent in English, and that in itself is just a huge achievement. So anyway, I'm sorry I spoke a bit too long there on that, and we can get into the meat of the episode if you want. Is there anything else you'd want to add there, Saban?
No, not really. Yeah, I think I said no, not really, but I'm going to add something. But I think learning languages is pretty insane, just overall. And again, with the fluency thing, I guess being able to speak a language and being able to actually speak a language is different in a very subtle kind of thing, like way. So there's a friend of mine, when she moved to the UK when she was 12 from Germany, and she knew zero English at that time, and she just speaks perfect English basically at this point. Basically there's zero accent, you won't be able to tell basically. And she knew zero English. She was being chucked straight into school and somehow figuring out everything, and she's studying medicine now and everything. So that's a massive achievement, just being able to do that. So that's kind of going into the whole bilingual stuff and just learning languages, coming at a fairly late age and just being able to learn a language fluently is pretty insane.
Yeah, the final comment on that is, if you're listening to this and you do know anyone or you yourself are truly bilingual, it's just to recognize the achievement of being able to do that. So yeah, as I said, I think it'll be a few years until I can consider myself fluent in any language other than English. But what I do have experience in is learning how to communicate in a language and knowing how to get started, how to improve, and then how to become comfortable in the environment of that language. So that's what we'll talk about now. I've written some bullet points. Hopefully we can just cover each of those. You can let me know your thoughts, Saban, and then we can explore them a little bit, and we'll see how long it is. Hopefully it doesn't take too long.
All right.
Yeah? Okay. So first thing, when learning a new language, why are you learning that language? Because you really need to know what you're getting yourself into. It's incredibly difficult. And I think when we start a new goal, we often think of the final product and we forget how difficult the process actually is. So before, say, learning Spanish, before learning French, before learning Arabic, I think it's important to spend hours learning about the actual language itself. So how it came about, where is it spoken now, why is it useful to be able to speak that language, how difficult is that language? That's really important. Often people start learning a language, they didn't realize that it's extremely complex. Even in the European languages, some of them are far easier than others for English speakers to communicate in. I mean, the closest language arguably to English that's a common language is Dutch. And then you've got the other Germanic languages, and you've even got dialects of Dutch, which are the more similar to English than standard Dutch. Like Frisian is really, really close to English. So it's the most, out of all the modern languages, it's probably the closest. And you can either do that, and it's kind of cheating, I guess, or you can choose one of the hardest languages, one of the most separated from English and separated furthest back in time from English. A language like Polish or Russian, for example, it's quite different to English out of the European languages. So it's about understanding how much time you're going to need to put in before you start getting a good product from it. Yeah, that's really important at the start. I think a common first language to learn for a lot of people is one of the Latin languages. I think Spanish and French are really good starting points for an English speaker because you're learning a useful language and it's not too dissimilar. I think when you're learning a very different language from your native language, if you're doing that as the first foreign language you're learning, it can be really, really hard because there's a process to learning languages. And if you've never done it before, then you're just compounding the difficult aspects of it by learning a really different language. Does that make sense?
Yeah, it does. And I guess the whole point of actually appreciating how hard it is, that's probably what I kind of underestimated when making the point of saying that I'm going to learn Arabic over the summer. Obviously, I didn't say I'm going to learn all of Arabic over the summer and just be fluent, but start making significant progress. I think so. I did sit down for a tiny bit, but I was like, wow, there's a lot. I don't even know where to start, and I just kind of never went back to it. So yeah, I think having a clear goal and just kind of appreciating how difficult it is, and that is going to be years. So it's that classic sigmoid learning curve, right? It's going to be really difficult in the first, period of time. Then after that, you'll make really significant progress, and it's going to taper out. But as it starts tapering out, you're not going to be fluent at that point either.
No.
After that tapering out section, you're just going to be probably the rest of your life to become fluent in it. And I guess I didn't really appreciate, for me at least, that beginning, like flat slope bit at the beginning is probably going to be really long because I just generally find languages quite difficult to learn, and I just didn't appreciate that.
But when you say you find language difficult to learn, often it's not. You're very good at learning information. You're a very good student at med school. You're clearly capable. You've got a lot of brain power. I think a lot of it is doing the right process, learning, going about it in the right way, and it's difficult to know how to do that. So, for example, I'm glad that I learned Mandarin after learning Spanish, French, Portuguese, because even understanding that there can be multiple verbs for something in a different language, where in English there's just one verb. even that concept, I will see a new word and I'll realize there are multiple words for this which seem to be translated into the same word in English. And I think, why is that? But from learning Spanish or from learning French, you get used to those patterns basically, and they're actually quite applicable across the board. So that's why the first thing I'm saying is I think you should start by learning a fairly simple language, something that's not too challenging. Arguably, if you want to learn a few different languages, obviously if you've got a special interest in learning Arabic, so it's not worth you learning Spanish so that you can learn Arabic. That's not worth your time. But
I guess I do have a certain level of familiarity with Arabic as well, because I can read it. So I can read it, but I don't know what I'm saying.
So it's an alphabet, isn't it?
Yeah, exactly. So I can actually read Arabic. I know very small bits of Arabic. I know the general structure of how it works and stuff. So I guess I have more familiarity than the general British person. So I guess that's why it's probably not too out there for me to attempt to learning Arabic as my first language to learn.
But something else that you say first. You say first.
Yeah. So I was just going to say that the point you said where I don't have a system to learn languages by, that's the actual sticking point for me. It's not so much that I find things hard to learn. Well, I mean, if it's out of my league, then obviously I'll find it hard to learn. But I have a set system and I have a set way of gaining knowledge in terms of information, concepts and understanding things. But languages is very different. I think that was the main sticking point that I had, was I don't have a system to kind of learn this kind of stuff. It's just very different to just learning a concept or understanding something. But yeah, sorry, carry on.
What you said earlier about the sigmoid curve is very true as well. When you start learning a language, it's not fun. You have to accept that it's not fun and that it's a real process. You have to be very disciplined with it. Do it every day. I think that applies to almost to a lot of different things. When you're starting to learn a new skill, the rewarding bit is very far away. So the rewarding bit in learning Arabic is being able to, learn Egyptian Arabic and then go to Egypt and be able to communicate with people on the street. That's a very rewarding aspect of it. Or, being able to read whole passages in the Quran in Arabic and not worry about the language or the translation and just read it for what it is. That's the dream. But that's so far away when you start learning Arabic. That's years away. You have to accept that you've got to put in the time now. And that's a really difficult thing to overcome. So you really need to know what you're getting yourself in for. That's sort of all encompassed in point number one. I'm aware of time, so I don't want to dwell too long on each point. But yeah, if there's only one thing you'll take away from the last 5 minutes, is really understand what you're in for. Learn about that language, learn about the history of that language, learn how difficult it's going to be to learn, and then plan ahead. Are you realistically going to be able to put the time in needed to learn that language? And then think about the end goal. Do you want to be fluent? As we said at the start of the episode, it's very difficult to be fluent in a different language. So is your goal to be fluent? Is your goal to be able to communicate in that language? Or is your goal just to be able to hold a very basic conversation in that language and, go to a restaurant and order some food in it? Those are all equally fine goals. There's no one goal that's superior to the other, but at least if you have a goal, you're working towards something. And I think that really helps motivation. So that's point number one. Is there anything you'd want to add onto that, Saban, before we move on?
No, I guess it's just the most important thing. But yeah, I think that's all done.
Cool. So the second thing is going into the method of learning the language. Obviously, I'm not a languages teacher, so I don't want to sit here and tell the listener how they should be learning it, but I can talk about my own experience and what has worked for me and given me success. So the first thing I want to say is there is no single method that works best, in my opinion. I think using a variety of resources is the best thing to do. What I mean by that is I don't think you should sit down and go on a language learning app, maybe a very famous one, and just learn vocab from that app, practice listening to vocab on that app and doing the sentences all on one course. I don't think that's as useful as constantly changing it up, reading newspapers, listening to podcasts, using that language course with the basic vocab, sitting there on Google Translate even, just having fun. Maybe it's not the best and most accurate way to learn a language, but it's enjoyable. Keep changing it up, and that makes it more enjoyable. You get more motivation from doing that, in my opinion, than sitting on the same app every day and telling you, you need to do your 10 minutes for the day, and sitting down and setting aside time just for that language, if that makes sense. I don't agree with that. I think you should be having a number of different networks where you're exposing yourself to that language. And then from that, you're constantly receiving words in a different context and in a new way. So if you're learning just from one language learning app, every single word you've learned is from the app, if that makes sense. Whereas I can remember a lot of words I learned in Portuguese from a shop sign or from reading it on a menu for the first time, or characters in Mandarin. For example, the characters for hot pot. I can see shops in London or Chinese restaurants in London where it says hot pot, the character's hot pot, and I can visualize it. Every word has a different context for me because I've seen it from a different place a lot of the time. So if you're just using that one app, you're just receiving every word in the same way. I think it's a lot harder to memorize them from that. So yeah, that's the first thing. Use a big variety of methods. Don't just stick to one. Is that fair enough, Saban?
Yeah, and just something related to just recognizing random, characters and stuff from languages. When I was in China, I think basically because we were in a lab and stuff, everyone spoke English, and we spent at least I spent all of my time in the lab, and we only went out a few times. But I think the one character I managed to just memorize and just recognize everywhere was that of Guangzhou, because that's where we were. So I just saw it everywhere and just learned it.
Guangzhou, yeah, exactly. You see that word a lot. You're constantly putting it into context. You're seeing those characters, and it helps you memorize it. But yeah, just doing it from one stream of information is not as useful in my opinion. So yeah, use a variety of methods, and as you get better, I think those methods should change as well. So you shouldn't keep relying on the same resource, because yeah, the better you get, you can start exposing yourself to films, start exposing yourself to books in that language, and yeah, don't be one-dimensional on how you learn it. But that's for later on in the process. Okay, so tying into the methodology is the actual process of starting learning the language. So learning the actual words themselves. I mean, without that, you can't really speak the language. So the actual way you should start learning it, in my opinion, is based around the verbs, because without verbs, you can't make sentences. The verb is what is describing everything that you're doing, and in communication, I think it's the cornerstone. At least with the verb, you can try and say what you're doing, or say what you need. If you say, may I, can I, you have, I have, you need, you see, look, those things are all based around verbs. Once you've got that, you can start communicating in a basic way. So it's not fun, but in my opinion, the first thing to do when learning a new language, or one of the very first things to do, is start learning the most common verbs. You can find a list of it online. Just Google, 100 most common verbs in French, 100 most commonly used verbs in Mandarin. And I'm sure that applies to almost every language. Once you've got those, you start building the sentences. You also obviously need the pronouns. So what's that, 10, 15 words in themselves, where you can say you, me, we, they, all of that. Once you've got those 10, 15 words and you've got the most common verbs, you can make basic sentences quick. So yeah, and a big thing, this is probably my biggest gripe about learning a language early on. Seriously, probably my number one biggest gripe. And I think people waste so much time by doing this, is they take too much time learning grammar. You don't need to be good at grammar in a language to a point. Unless you're, working as a translator, unless you want to write in the language. Most of the time, when you want to start learning a language, you want to just go there and be able to communicate in it to a basic level. It might sound very controversial, but I don't think it's actually as controversial as it sounds. What I'm saying here is people spend too long learning, for example, how to conjugate a verb. In the Latin languages, there are 6 conjugations for every verb. And in doing that, you're spending so much time trying to memorize something that someone would understand anyway in that language. So, for example, in Portuguese, the verb to play is jogar. Okay, so to say I play, jogo. You play, jogas. He or she plays, joga. We play, jogamos. And so on. In learning all of those, you're learning 6 or 7 separate words. If you just use the infinitive jogar, if I said to you, eu jogar, I play, I to play, you understand what I'm saying. It means I play. that's implying, I don't know, can I play? If you go up to, if you see people playing football and you go up to them and say, "El jogar," they will understand what you're saying. That's very high yield. Learn the infinitives and very quickly you'll learn the conjugations. So what I'm saying there about just going up and using an infinitive, obviously you won't do that, but you will learn the conjugations quickly anyway, because I don't know, you don't need to spend so long doing that, in my opinion. And that's the same in French, that's the same in Spanish, and it's not the same in Mandarin because you just use the infinitive in Mandarin. So yeah, they don't change the verb based off the person, but that's what I mean by don't waste too much time on grammar. Obviously learn how to construct a sentence in that language, but past that, just focus on learning as many different verbs as you can and as many different words as you can, because that's what you're going to need to start expressing what you think, expressing what you need. That's the most important bit. So as I said, learning the most common verbs, learn the prepositions. So learn how to say, I don't know, after, before, on, under, in, because once you've got those as well, then you're really starting to make sentences. The only thing left is the vocabulary. And the vocabulary, the words that you need to use, you will learn. That sounds ridiculous, but I don't know, a word like bus, a word like car, if you're using that word, it will come up and you can memorize it that way. But I don't think you should sit down with a vocab list when you're starting a language and learn the word for pencil, learn the word for pen, learn the word for ruler. Yeah, as I said, as and when, if you need that word, you can use it at that time. But focus on the words that you're using in every sentence first. And those are verbs, those are the pronouns, those are the prepositions. Learn the linking words, how to say and, with, I don't know, like, you know what I mean by that, because that's how you link separate thoughts together. Really important. And yeah, the words that I'm speaking about, we're only talking probably 200, 300 words. If you learn those, you can quite effectively communicate to a certain level, honestly. And that's what I did in Italian, for example. And I don't want to say I'm good at Italian, but learning how to say tomorrow, yesterday, me, you, the most common verbs. I eat, can I help? I am tired, because that was an adjective I used a lot, tired. Just learning those 200-300. I wasn't speaking good Italian, but I was communicating. You know, you go into a shop, I say, I buy this, how much money? Learn the numbers, obviously, as well, up to, I don't know, 50, 100. And from there, you're able to communicate. It's not... Learning all this complex grammar is not as high yield, in my opinion. So, yeah, that's what I'm trying to say in this little segment. Just learn the verbs, and then learn what I was just talking about, and you'll be able to communicate fairly well. Sorry, what were you going to say, Saban?
Yeah, no, it just kind of brought up a few thoughts in my mind, in the fact that what you're basically explaining is basically how a child, a baby who knows zero language, zero words, only sounds, that's how they learn languages, and that's how they start communicating to become fluent in a particular language later on.
Yes.
They start off, saying their first word, and all they're literally saying is random words because that's all they know. And I guess that's part of the process. In your very first days, all you will know is a few random words.
Yes.
And slowly, over time, that child will just by listening to it so much, will start to understand by context what goes where and how communication actually works. And the point you said where you don't... all you really need to know is the infinitive version of the verb, so to play or whatever. But when you're actually communicating, there's a lot more in communication than just the words. Most of communication is outside of the words and more how you say something,
exactly,
your body language and everything. So like you said in that example, say if you go up to a group of kids playing football and you also want to play, but you don't know how to say that, if you just say, even if you just say the verb to play, but you say it with an upward intonation, like to play, like it would be I play kind of thing, like you were saying. So in that way, it's more of a learning game in that way, in learning it like a child. That's going to be the most effective way so you don't always have to keep revising that language for the rest of your life.
No, because the better you get at the language, you'll learn how to use the grammar properly, because you will have said each sentence, you will have said so many times that you just learn how to say it. You'll pick that up in conversation. But at the start, just learn the words, learn the building blocks, the absolute foundations. In Mandarin, I would say it's learning the most common characters. it's the bit at the bottom of the sigmoid curve that you were talking about before. It's not the fun bit. Just sit down with the 100 most common characters in Mandarin China, or in Chinese, because all of the different dialects use the same character system. Just sit down and learn those 100, 150 of them. Once you get those, you can start recognizing, in each sentence, you can start recognizing a good proportion of the words. It's not fun, this bit that we're talking about, the rote learning bit, but with that discipline, you get to the rewarding bit quicker. And what I'm saying is learning the grammar perfectly will slow that down. So yeah, I hope I've made myself fairly clear in that. I'm sure that there'll be people who disagree, and I welcome that, of course. And the way I'm learning a language is still changing, but that's something I've found really works for me. Prioritizing the words that I'm going to be using, not worrying about the grammar. That will sort itself out over time, because as I said, every word you're using, you hear it in context again and again. You learn how it's said. That's an intangible. Yeah. So just sit down with the lists and work on those.
Okay. What about tenses?
Again, tenses. So in the Latin languages, for example, again, each. So in Portuguese, to say yesterday I played, you say ontem eu joguei. Ontem joguei. But if I said ontem eu jogar to someone, they will understand what I'm saying. It's yesterday I play. Again, if someone said that to you in English, if someone said yesterday I played versus yesterday I play, you will understand almost exactly the same thing. It doesn't matter. I mean, you're clearly not fluent in that language. I'm clearly not fluent in Portuguese anyway. If when I was just starting it, I clearly wasn't fluent anyway. So I would just focus on learning as many of the different verbs, and with tenses, just putting in the timestamp. I mean, in Mandarin, you don't really have tenses anyway. Well, not in the same way. You have words that complete a sentence, like la or guo. Those are like ways that you can make a verb into the past tense. Like ni chu guo is like, have you been before? But the chu, which is to go, remains the same. Does that make sense? You're not conjugating the chu. You're just adding something onto it to make it past tense. So the reason why I'm adding this bit is in Mandarin, it works slightly differently. But again, with all languages, if you can just put a timestamp, so you say tomorrow, yesterday, today, the tenses sort themselves out a lot more easily anyway. So yeah, and the final point on that is, of course, at some point you should start, once you know them, you should start using it correctly. I'm just saying at the start, you'd be surprised that at how often you don't need to know the exactly correct conjugation for a point to be made. So yeah, again, I'm sure a lot of people disagree, but that's fine. Yeah, maybe future me will listen to this and really disagree as well. But anyway, I'll move on to the next point. Things don't directly translate. Yeah, so that's just a quick point on its own, really. A lot of English speakers, I see a lot of people directly translate something they're trying to say from English into another language, but we need to remember that every language works differently. So as you said, it's better to learn the new language like you're a baby learning something for the first time. Don't put it in the context of English. When you're learning the new language, learn it as if you've never learned a language before. Yeah, that's all I'm going to say on that. The next one is a very well-known thing about languages, which is practice wherever possible and immerse yourself. So yeah, I think most people know that already, but it's so true. It's really important. I don't think you should be able to say how many hours you're practicing a day, because I think you should just be constantly practicing it. It should be everywhere. And this isn't just about sitting down and reading a book in Spanish or whatever. It's, you should have YouTube channels you like in Spanish. You should be following pages on Twitter that you like in Spanish. I see people changing the languages on their phone to Spanish. I think that's okay. But the most important thing is immerse yourself in the setting of that language, outside of it as well. Even eating food from that country, learning the names of the dishes, it all adds up. So yeah, I don't know how many hours a day I practice Mandarin really, because I'll watch a few YouTube videos of my favorite YouTubers who speak Mandarin. When I'm cooking, I'll be looking at the ingredient packets. I'll see a character I haven't seen before. I'll look that up. I've learned one there. It's hard to quantify. You should just be constantly doing it. And then another big thing is get used to speaking it. If you don't have anyone else to speak with, that's not an excuse. You should be doing it on your own then. When I'm walking down the street, or for example, when I play golf, a lot of the time, if I'm on my own, I won't stick on music or anything. I will literally just talk in a different language the whole time. So I will try and talk in Italian for the whole round, just be going like, oh, that wasn't good. This was very good. Or how far away is that? And I'm sure I'm making mistakes. That's fine. And some people would argue, oh, if you're making a mistake there, no one's correcting you. But my argument here is just being used to speak in that language. Being used to speaking in that language, having the vocab there in your mind and being able to extract it, putting it into sentences. It doesn't really matter if you're using the language perfectly, just being used to expressing yourself in that language. You can be doing that all the time. When I was learning Portuguese, I would have a pocket dictionary and I would be basically in Portugal, going through shops and just seeing words like on advertisements and stuff, opening the dictionary, learning that word, and then I'd walk down the street just trying to use that word in what I'm doing, if that makes sense. Yeah, basically just constantly be practicing that language. And also after a couple of minutes, I find that I get stuck in that language, like I get stuck in that way of thinking, if that makes sense. So sometimes I'll be on my own and just talking to myself in Mandarin, and I'll just be talking to myself, and I'm not even doing it deliberately. After a while, I'm just going like, yeah, okay, I've finished my cup of tea now, I need to go and wash up. And then whenever I encounter a word I don't know, so say I didn't know the word to wash up, yeah, I would go into my pocket, I would look up the word wash up in Mandarin, and then use the word again. So I'd go, I need to go and get my cup of tea and wash up, and then I'd go, now I'm washing up, I'm very tired, after washing up I'm going to have a shower. Do you see what I'm saying? Just constantly talking in it the whole time. Oh, I need to do some studying in a minute. Oh, I'm very tired, whatever. And every time I encounter a word I don't know, look it up, because those are the words I'm actually using. That's the vocab I'm using day to day all the time. If I notice next time I want to go and use the word, the words to wash up, I might forget. That's fine. Language learning is a process of forgetting and then remembering, and then forgetting and then remembering. Don't sit there and write down the same word 10 times just to memorize it. It's not worth it. You're going to forget it. You're going to remember it. And every time you remember it again, you've put it into a new context. So it's a lot more high yield. You're doing a lot more with your time if you accept that you're going to forget things every now and again, and don't be too hard on yourself with it. And the important words will keep coming up, right? So if it's a word that I've written down 10 times and then I don't use it for a year, well, it probably wasn't an important word, so it doesn't matter. But yeah, if I keep learning the word again and again, then it's probably going to stick. I hope that makes sense. But yeah, that's what I mean by immersion. You should just be living in that language. It's not a case of, oh, I'm going to sit down and watch my Spanish show for the day. Yeah, you should be constantly surrounded by it. If you can find people who speak that language, that's a lot better. Obviously, it's a lot more convenient. If you can find music you like in that language, that's also a lot more convenient. But this ties into what we were talking about at the start. Why do you choose to start learning a language in the first place? You should probably like that culture. You should probably be prepared to immerse yourself in it. If you get to that point and you're like, oh, I don't actually like this culture, then yeah, it's too late. That's what you should have done from the start. So yeah, having one other thing that kind of ties into this is have a really good source of translation. Like have a resource like Word Reference or a specific app where you can plug in a character and it will tell you what that means on hand all the time, because of what I was just talking about. If you told me you were learning Arabic, I would want to see you all the time just practicing words in that language constantly, and having to hold yourself back almost from using it all the time. When I'm with people, if I'm in the Mandarin mode, I'm having to literally stop myself from just speaking in Mandarin. I just want everything they say, I'm translating in my head to Mandarin. I just want to be using it. I'm itching to use it. The gears are turning and I'm just thinking in that way. So if you don't have a source of translation on you at any given point, you're wasting your time. You should be constantly referring to it. So yeah, have that app open all the time, ready to use. Yeah, and then as I said, the words you're using a lot, you will just keep translating the same one over and over again, and it will just stick quick. So yeah, that's what passion is. That's where it comes from, because it's so rewarding to see yourself get better every day. It's really important. That's where the motivation comes from as well. I learned that word, I use it the next day, and I think a couple of days ago I didn't know that word. I use it all the time, day to day now. It's so nice to be able to use that word in a different language and express how I feel in a different way. It's so nice, and that's the reward. So instead of worrying about the absolute end goal, even the fact that I can say to myself, oh, I'm tired, or oh, this is tasty in a different language, that's a really, really rewarding thing. Not just, being able to read a classic novel in that language. So yeah, and the last thing on this vein of, I don't know, this is a stream of information here. Just quickly, is there anything you want to add to that? Sorry?
So in the aspect of immersion, I think that is a really important point, and the whole culture and everything behind it, and actually wanting to become one with the language, basically, and understand every single aspect, not just the words. I had a friend who I think 2 years ago went to, so he'd started learning Arabic basically, and he went to Egypt over I'm pretty sure it was Egypt or Morocco. I want to say Egypt, over the summer for 3 months, basically. Came back basically speaking Arabic fluently. So that's the power of immersion, basically. Obviously not fluent, but as in he can basically just go to Arabic speaking country and just speak Arabic like normally. To the point where it's not like, how we were talking about the earlier stages where it's broken, your verbs are getting messed up and stuff. It's pretty much like bang on. But that really shows the power of immersion, that when you're in that situation, all you can do is just learn the language. So you just kind of have to. Yeah.
I think when people say they got a lot better after they went to that country, it's because they were forced to be in an environment where they were speaking it all the time. But you can, if you have the motivation, you can create that environment wherever you are. But it has to come from within. You have to want to be doing it. And that's, again, you have to want to be learning this language in the first place. So, yeah.
I think going to the country has a special factor with it just because of the whole culture and having real native people always speaking it in the way it's actually spoken rather than the textbook or, classroom way of speaking the language.
100%, 100%. It's the nuances as well, right? So, I don't want to for a second try and say there that you can get as good an experience from, I don't know, creating an Arabic environment around you instead of going to Egypt, going to Morocco, going to Saudi Arabia, and actually seeing all the nuances of the language in person. It's unquestionably miles better. But yeah, all I'm saying is it's not an excuse saying, oh, I've never been, so I didn't want to start learning. You can create the environment anywhere if you want to. Sorry, I cut you off a bit.
Yeah, no, I just had a random question. Do you think you have different personalities in the different languages, even to the level that you speak them at?
For me personally, no, because again, I don't think I'm good enough at any language other than English to have a personality in it. But I do think language influences your personality in a way because it influences how you can express yourself. And I think for me, maybe my sense of humor is a bit different in a couple of other languages. The only languages where I think I can crack jokes and comfortably be humorous is Spanish and Portuguese. Those are the languages where I can hold a conversation without a problem in a lot of circumstances. So, or I don't know, watch a film and stuff like that and appreciate humor more. Those are the languages where I'm not, I don't know, worried. I can just speak it, without thinking too much. So yeah, maybe those are the ones where I have a bit of a different personality, but in the other ones, no way.
I mean, if the language affects your original personality, just say in English, I wonder how long it will take for Mandarin to have an effect that in English you just start speaking in ancient proverbs.
Well, the thing is, Mandarin's a very direct language. So the language has influenced, for example, this is now quite subjective, but you'll find that a lot of Chinese people, I think, are very direct in how they speak. Do you want this or go or whatever, like in Chinese restaurants or whatever. I'm sure there are different reasons for it as well, but one reason is in Mandarin, it is a very direct language. There aren't all of these ways you can pamper a sentence like you can in English, Generally, I think that in some ways it's good, arguably, blah, blah, blah. It doesn't quite work in the same way. It's not as flowery. So again, I think that influences the way they communicate. It's a lot more direct. 你要不要? Like, do you want? Do you not want? 你去不去? Like, are you going? You're not going? Like, there's no softness around it. So yeah, do you see what I'm saying there?
Yeah, I do rate that, to be fair. I should probably start learning that. Just straight to the point, no waffle. Just, I bet Chinese books are just like probably tiny because there's no waffle and it's just pure content.
Again, I don't want to I don't want to say that I'm good enough to know anything just to know more than I actually do. But again, yeah, that's just something I've experienced in Mandarin, is that it's a lot more direct. And yeah, if I am speaking to someone in Mandarin, I find that I can express myself in a lot less words, because a friend of mine who speaks Mandarin told me that, yeah, they don't need to really specify too often, in my opinion, or make the sentence flowery, because they don't have to specify seriously, like I seriously like this, I honestly like this, because if they say I like this, they mean they like this. Whereas in English, yeah, you can say it in so many different ways. It's just so much more direct in Mandarin, and that's something I quite respect about the language. But yeah, moving on to the last thing I was going to say was time. So you have to dedicate a lot of time to a language. It kind of ties into the very first point. You have to accept that if you're going to get better, it has to be taking up, in some ways, all of your time at certain points. You know, so for whole days at a time, you should just be living in that language if you want to get a lot better. So with your friend who came back from abroad and was speaking way better in Arabic, yeah, he was just spending a limitless amount of time surrounded by that language. Or you at home hearing Urdu in the household, it's limitless amount of time, really. It's so much time. And if you don't have the choice there, but if you have the choice, you can choose whether you're being surrounded by that language. What I'm saying here is, yeah, you shouldn't just be setting aside time. It should be constantly surrounding you, and you have to dedicate a lot of time to it. So you have to want to learn this language. It's very important. And at the end of the day, it's worth it, almost always, especially the languages that are very commonly spoken or have a strong culture. It's almost always worth it. And I think it's so good for your brain too. It's so good for your perspective on the world and the way you think and the way you can express yourself, and also the way you can communicate with other people. Even now, if I'm communicating with someone where I don't speak their language at all, but they speak English, just not as well as me. So say they're not fluent in English, basically, or they're not very proficient in it. Even if we can only communicate using that English, I think now, compared to before, when I didn't know any other languages very well, I can change the way I speak English, because I remember how it was, or I know when you're starting a language how to speak in a certain way that it's easier to understand. What I'm trying to say here is I think it improves your communication skills immeasurably in all ways, not even in just the language that you're learning, but with circumstances of all different languages.
I think it also opens up just the entire world. I mean, if you learn, say, Arabic, that opens up the entire Middle East, and, certain, countries in, say, North Africa that also speak Arabic and stuff. That opens up that entire world in terms of, either being able to go on holiday and, actually understand the culture and language and stuff, and be engrossed in that country when you're there in a different kind of level, or say, even just learning about the history or something, you'll just kind of appreciate it and understand it a lot more. And it will be the same with any language, say with Spanish or something, all the Spanish speaking countries, that just basically opens up a different dimension for all of those countries for you.
Yeah.
So,
especially with the main ones. So I remember, I can try and quickly find it. I saw a power language index, and I think it was really interesting. It really influenced it really influenced the languages that I did choose to learn in the end, because knowing that a language is going to be really valued and spoken widely was a big source of motivation. I'll see if I can find it quickly.
This is the paper, like, that's some dude's PhD thesis, right?
It was something like that. It was something like that. Yeah. Oh, here it is.
Oh, yeah. Man, that was really interesting, because you see all the geopolitical, power in terms of academia or politics of that language.
Yeah,
and stuff.
exactly. So he had, here it is. He had.
Wait, how did you get it up so fast? You have it saved like on your desktop or something?
I have it bookmarked, yeah. I use it as a reference point because, again, it's a big source of motivation, knowing that a language will be used, knowing that you can use it in a variety of places. And this document is really useful. We could, if we're allowed, we could put it in the show notes. I don't know if it's allowed. I mean, it's a link that anyone can access. So, it's a big shout out to this dude, Kai Chan. Kai Chan, PhD. Just making sure... that he gets the plug. Sure so the parameters he used were geography, economy, communication, knowledge and media, and diplomacy. And he made a formula essentially to calculate the power of each language in the world, and therefore what languages are most useful in a general sense to know. So the top 10, there's a lot of stats here, but I'll go down to the actual list itself. Do you mind if I go through it quickly?
We spent like 4 hours discussing this document.
Yeah, it is really interesting because he goes through so many and he gives them all a score. So looking here, if we go, do you mind if I quickly go through it?
No, go ahead. I guess we can go in detail later on in like a future episode and break down what we think of each country in the analysis.
Yes, definitely. I'll do the top, let's say top 16, because 16th is quite interesting. So 16th is Korean, with 80 million speakers. 15th is Polish, 40 million speakers. It scores quite consistently, as in it's not particularly high in any parameter in any parameter individually, but overall it's just quite consistent. Then you've got Malay, which scores pretty well in its geography, but not as well in the other parameters. Going up to Dutch. Dutch is very useful according to this in an economic sense. I guess, I don't know, EU, a lot of commerce going through the Netherlands. 12th, Italian. 64 million speakers, very useful in knowledge and media. I guess Italy has contributed so much to music and literature and art, and even today is still some Italian brands and Italian.
What countries speak Italian apart from Italy?
It's just Italy and certain parts.
Oh, mad.
So I believe certain parts of Ethiopia also speak Italian, and
Ethiopia.
Yeah, there's a historical aspect there. It's interesting. There are definitely people who still speak Italian or Italian areas of Ethiopia. And then you have, let's see, native to region, language, family. I can't find anything else about it here other than a map, which also has Libya speaking some Italian, Somalia to Eritrea. Yeah, just basically historical implications. Also, you have regions of South America, like southern Brazil, with strong areas of Italian ancestry, and northeast USA, where there are big Italian communities who bring their culture with them. But again, it's not an official language there, and it's also not an official language in Ethiopia. I just want to clarify. It's only official in Italy, San Marino, Switzerland, and the Vatican. Okay, so
Switzerland.
Yeah, Switzerland has an Italian part. Switzerland has a French part.
I don't know if this is common knowledge or I'm just out.
No. Switzerland is like a polyglot's paradise because in Switzerland they speak German is the slight majority, and then there's a large French part. I believe it's about 30% French, and then you have Romansh, which is like a native Swiss German, and then you've got the Italian part, which is like the southeast, because it borders Italy. So yeah, there's an Italian part too. So a lot of Swiss people speak at least French and German, and then English as a lingua franca, often everywhere in the world, and then Italian as well in certain parts. But anyway, then you've got 11th, which is Cantonese, dialect of Mandarin Chinese. It's still incredibly useful to know from what I understand, even though the language itself is being used less and less, sadly, and that is spoken in Guangdong, Hong Kong, Macau. So you will have a slight experience with it, and they use the different character system there as well, slightly from most of the other parts of China, because they use the traditional character system instead of the simplified character system. So yeah, anyway, there are links between the two though. Like if you can read traditional characters, you can pretty much read almost all of the simplified characters. I don't want to make this episode too long. I know we're going to go into it properly, so I'll just list off the next 10. Should we do that instead?
Yeah.
Hindi, Portuguese, Japanese, German, Russian, Arabic, Spanish, French, Mandarin, and English. Yeah, very interesting.
Wait, what was the top 3? Spanish, Mandarin, English.
Yeah, I'll go through the top 10 very quickly again. So Hindi, I guess it speaks for itself. Portuguese. There's a strong Lusophone influence in a lot of different parts of the world. So you've got all of Brazil, you've got certain countries in Africa, Angola, Mozambique, still big countries in Africa that use Portuguese. And then obviously Portugal. And then smaller, some are tiny language-speaking Portuguese communities in parts of India even. Macau used to speak Portuguese and still has an influence there. And then East Timor. And a few islands as well. island nations. But yeah, anyway, Japanese, just only spoken in Japan pretty much, but Japan being so influential. German, yeah, German speaking countries so important in the world. Russian, all of the history there, remaining strong influence too. Then Arabic, I guess they've lumped all of Arabic into one. But again, that's a whole world, as you were saying. It's the window into such a big part of the world. So I'd love to speak it one day, but I don't think it's going to happen. But hopefully you can help me there, being a translator. If we go to Egypt or something.
If I ever start learning.
Yeah, you got to start actually, yeah.
Yeah.
Spanish, most of Latin America. And then French, obviously, not actually spoken as much as some of the other languages up in the top of the list, but French has such an important historical influence, and is still today, obviously. You've got so many francophone countries, or at least with an influence of French, especially in like Northwest Africa. And then second, Mandarin. And Mandarin is just growing and growing in its importance because they're trying to standardize it across China. And then over time, I think you'll see a lot more foreign people learning Mandarin as well. And then, yeah, English, which is really far ahead of the other ones on this algorithm. And I guess it speaks for itself. It's pretty much a lingua franca. So we're very, very lucky to be speaking English as a native language. But yeah. Okay, sorry. I turned that into a bit of an impromptu rant through the languages. So we can decide what to do with this bit. But it's gone off topic a bit. Is there anything else we should add?
No, Nori, I guess, yeah, like you said, we are very lucky that we were born speaking English, that we grew up speaking English, learning English, that it's our main language, our first language, and we're fluent in it in terms of understanding, reading, writing, because the amount of content out there that is all in English these days, especially on the internet, like some huge percentage of the internet is in English. Most of YouTube is probably in English and stuff, and that just opens up a huge array of opportunities. And just being able to, pick up a book, and even if the book wasn't originally in English, there's probably an English translation, whereas you wouldn't get that for a lot of other languages. And yeah, so I think a lot of native English speakers just kind of get stuck into the thing where they don't have the necessity to learn another language, whereas pretty much every other country has, or every other country in terms of their citizens have some actual level of requirement to learn English to a certain extent in a lot of cases. So yeah, I think learning languages and appreciating it, if you are an English speaker, is probably even more important, because I guess any other non-native English speakers probably already have a high level of appreciation compared to native English speakers. But I'm speaking from my own perspective and understanding for the language. So I guess I can't speak for every single native English speaker.
No, I mean, what you spoke about though, I think is really true. There's this thing called the 3 circles of English, and I think the guy who came up with it is called Braj Katru. I don't know how to pronounce it properly, but the 3 circles of English are talking about how English is used across the world. I've just looked him up. He was an Indian linguist. He was a professor of linguistics at the University of Illinois, and yeah, his 3 circles of English I quite like, because you've got the inner circle, which is the countries that use English as their language, so USA, UK, Canada, and so on. Then the countries where English is used as kind of the communication point between different communities who don't speak English within the country. So like, I don't know, like the Hausa people, the Yoruba people, the Igbo people within Nigeria. I believe English is used as like a middle point. So English is commonly used in Nigeria these days. Or it's the same in India, right? Like English in the cities, I understand, is the language used in a lot of commerce and stuff as well. So that's the middle circle, countries where English is a part of the culture and it exists there, but alongside native languages. And then you have the outer circle, which is the places where English does not carry an influence. So, we're talking China, Russia, Brazil, Japan. A lot of the countries which have Japan, exactly, where they have their own languages that are used 100%, like with minimal influence from other things. So incredibly interesting, the 3 circles of English. And that really stuck out to me when I started learning about different languages, realizing how certain languages are used as center points to bring people together. So you'll have 2 people from completely different countries. It happens all the time in Europe. You'll have a Dutchman speaking to an Italian and they'll be using English because that's the middle language. That's often the common ground. Super interesting. Anyway, I know I've gone way off topic, so maybe we could split this episode into 2 parts or something. I don't know how long we've been speaking for.
I mean, it's been about an hour, so it's not too bad overall.
Okay, cool.
But we'll see. Yeah.
And in future episodes, maybe we can go into a certain specific area of languages, if that makes sense. We can either be talking about one language on its own or one specific aspect of learning the languages. But yeah, for now, I think that's probably just an overview of just our thoughts on language learning.
Indeed. All right. Peace.
Peace.
Thank you for listening to this episode of Getting It.
If you enjoyed this episode,
or didn't,
then feel free to leave us a rating and review on the Apple Podcasts app or on the Apple Podcasts website.
We'd love to hear your thoughts, ideas, or questions about anything we discussed, so feel free to email us at thoughts@gettingit.co.uk.
You can also reach us on Twitter or Instagram at gettingit_pod.
You can find all the links in the show notes.